So welcome back to this, the second part of my short curated tour of Japan. It's a destination I've been to a couple of times, as I said in the first video. There's a link to the first video above if you haven't seen that. This started because I have a folder on my computer which contains a few images that when I have a sort of creative block or a creative void, I go and look at those images and it just gives me that sort of inspiration to pick up and move forward. A number of the images in that folder are from Japan, and I thought after a week of torrential rain here in the UK and not being able to get out, that actually I'd share some of them with you. There were too many images to put into one video, so I broke them down, and the first video was about the more urban side, the more modern side of Japan. This second video, I started off by thinking it was about the countryside, but as I've looked at the images, I've realised it's not just about the countryside, it's about that softer side of Japan. You've got perhaps the more harder, modern side, the urban side of Japan, but there's a softer side which is more spiritual, more cultural, deep history and deep traditions. So that's what this curated set of images is really about. So let's get stuck into those images, and I'll try and give you some of the background, some of the memories it brings back to me, because images for me are about more than just the image. It's the memories that it evokes or the emotions that it evokes if you weren't there. So this first image is probably one you've seen a lot of times. It's a bit of a hero image from Japan. It's Fushimi Inari Shrine, which is just outside of Kyoto. Fushimi Inari Shrine is actually the shrine at the bottom of the hill, and leading up from the shrine at the bottom to the top of the hill are some tens of thousands of torii gates, and that's what you see the images of. As you walk up to the top of the hill and back down again, you are led through all of these torii gates, and this image for me really worked because the leading lines lead you off into the distance and round. The day we were there, it was torrential rain, so all of the gates had a slight glistening nature to them. You can see the drops of rain on the tops of the gates. This was taken with my D800, the 2470 f2.8 lens, and whilst it looks quite light, actually it was quite an overcast day. So this was at about ISO 2500. It was handheld at f8 to try and get the right depth of field. What you realise in Japan is that if you're going to some of these hero locations, you're never alone there. This was relatively early in the morning, and I was lucky to get a shot with no one in the frame. Actually, behind me there was a bit of a backup of people, and actually people are very tolerant in Japan of photographers. So there were 2 or 3 other photographers, and when I'd taken my shot, I stepped back and let them take their shots, and then the continuation of people coming through carried on. And just to give you an idea of what it's really like, this is the reality of Fushimi Inari. It's busy at almost all times. So this is another sort of hero location. This is Arashiyama Bamboo Grove, and you see lots of shots of this. And again, we were there in the afternoon and it was full of other people, but what you have to work out is you have to work with the people there, and this little group of ladies in their kimonos were there, and they gave a bit of foreground interest that perhaps blocked out some of the people in the background and gave a different feel to this image. This image was quite challenging. It was taken on my 1635 f4 lens at 16mm to try and get the enormity of the bamboo grove into the shot. But the challenge here was it was a very high contrast situation. At the top you had a very bright sky, and you can see it's slightly burnt out in some of the areas, and at the bottom there was very little light, so these ladies were actually in shade, and this took quite a lot of manipulation in Lightroom to get a balance between the contrast. I couldn't really use bracketing because the ladies were moving, and therefore the images would have had a ghosting effect to them, but I was quite pleased with how this came out. We've got the detail in the foreground, and I think the ladies in their kimonos really make that shot for me, and it really added to that vibrance of this shot. This next picture is of some master fishermen using a very traditional technique out on the Katsura River at Arashiyama. near the bamboo grove. And what they do is they use cormorants, trained cormorants, to go in and get the fish for them. So they have this burning fire at the back of the boat to draw the fish up to the surface, and then they let these cormorants go in, get the fish and bring them back to them. This was taken obviously at night. The fisherman's boat was moving. I was in a boat. I was using the D800 with 2470, so there was no vibration reduction on this. It was taken at ISO 3200, which is where I used to really limit the D800 because I knew the noise wasn't too bad at that level. It was taken at 1/25 of a second at f2.8 in a moving boat. So actually to keep it sharp took a fair amount of technique. There is a slight blur. The f2.8 made it difficult because of the depth of field, but for a nighttime photograph that captured the essence of the cormorant fishing, you can see a cormorant just being helped out of the water with a fish. So it captured the essence of being there and experiencing this very traditional way of fishing on the Katsura River. So this shot is of a mako, that's a trainee geiko, out with their chaperone in Gion in Kyoto. We've been to Kyoto a couple of times, and this is one of the only times we saw a mako or a geiko out in Gion. It's quite difficult to get a shot. There aren't many of them, so actually when they come out of the buildings, they move at quite a pace to get to wherever they're going. In this shot, again, it was the D800 with 2470, so no vibration reduction. It was at 70 mil, and the mako and her chaperone were moving at pace down this road, and I was moving to try and keep behind them at a discreet distance. So I feel quite lucky that I managed to get this shot, because without vibration reduction, which, you know, inbuilt image stabilization in the new Z series cameras would probably change the probability of getting this shot quite significantly. It took a little bit of manipulation, all done in Lightroom, just to give it a more cinematic feel and a flatter feel, which I felt was in keeping with the scene, the wooden buildings around, a slight vignette to draw your eye into the main subject of this photo, which is the mako and her chaperone. And I was lucky enough just to catch the mako turning to talk to her chaperone, which added to the image for me, and it's one that I just takes me back to Gion and that very traditional feel in Kyoto. I mentioned that the second time we went, we were there in the autumn or the fall time, and we were just slightly early in Kyoto for the real richness of fall colours. But you get a feeling from this image, the reds and the yellows really starting to come through on those Japanese maple trees that surround this temple in Kyoto. This isn't my best image ever, but it was, for me, it just shows the detail in the temple, the colours in the temple, which balanced with the colours in the autumn trees around it. This was taken on an iPhone 6s Plus and just shows what you can achieve with modern smartphones. There was a bit of manipulation in Snapseed and a little bit in VSCO as well. But for me, it just, that detail, that ornate nature and the tranquility of the temple just takes me back to Kyoto. As I said, if you ever go to Japan, make sure you do go to Kyoto as well as Tokyo, and go to some of the lesser temples, not the big iconic top 10 temples to go to or top 10 locations to go to in Kyoto. Some of these smaller temples are just beautiful in the ornateness, as I say, of the buildings and how they blend into the nature and the beautiful landscaped gardens that quite often surround them. This is another iPhone shot taken in a temple, but you're starting to get a feel for the vibrancy of the autumn colours. There wasn't much manipulation done to this. It was a little bit in Snapseed to make the colours pop a little bit more, but the Japanese gardens are just beautiful. And when we were there, we were lucky it was raining again, but that really didn't detract from it because it gave the leaves a bit of a glisten. It also meant we were lucky because we were a few weeks slightly ahead of the colours. It was really quiet there. It was tranquil. There weren't many other people. A couple of weeks later, you'd have probably had people going across that bridge all the time. So visiting slightly out of season is not a bad thing. Japan is a seasonal country like the UK, so it has distinct spring, summer, autumn and winters. And each of those seasons has different feels, different things to go and see. So as I said, we've been in the summer and the autumn. Winter and spring are definitely on our bucket lists for perhaps the cranes, the snow monkeys, and then in the spring the blossom. This is a shot of the iconic floating torii gate on Miyajima, which is the Japanese for Shrine Island. The island is actually called Itsukushima Island, and there's Itsukushima Shrine, which is just behind the torii gate. We were lucky. We stayed on the island rather than staying in Hiroshima and getting the ferry across. And we were really lucky with our timings, because to get this shot, you had to have the high tide at the right time of day, the sun setting in the right direction, and the weather being favourable for us. So we were really lucky in that we had high tide at sunset, and we had a few clouds in the sky, but we still had the sun setting, and the sun is actually behind the torii gate and the reflection right in between the legs of the torii gate. This was taken with the D800. It was on a tripod for this shot. It was taken at 24mm. It was taken with one shot. I did quite a few shots with bracketing. However, this was a single shot. All of the adjustments to this shot were done in Lightroom with various techniques from a single shot. So I was very pleased with how this came out, because it's just how I remember being there and watching the sun go down. There was a line of photographers, so again, patience and getting there at the right time and working out where was the sun going to set, or what direction to get this, was all part of the planning, the preparation. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick curated tour of perhaps the softer side of Japan, which when married up with the more urban, modern, harder side of Japan in the first video has given you a real insight. Let us know in the comments below where your favourite photo locations are. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.